All right, here we are. Welcome to the final explainer in our series on AGI polarization. Today, we're zooming all the way out. We're going to see how these tiny little design choices that we make today, how they scale up to define the destiny of entire nations and, yeah, even civilizations in this new age of AGI.
And, on a purely technical level, that's spot on. The technology itself is becoming incredibly flat. OpenAI's models are used everywhere, NVIDIA's chips. They work the exact same way whether they're in a data center in Ohio or in Osaka. The core tech is basically universal.
So this is where it gets really interesting, right? It presents us with this massive puzzle. If the AGI is the same everywhere you introduce it, how come some nations see social trust actually get deeper while others are just facing total chaos and systemic paralysis? What is going on that explains this massive difference in outcomes?
Now, the first thing you'll probably hear is the tech gap explanation. The analysts start asking, how many GPUs does this country have? Does it have its own national AI model? And look, those aren't silly questions. They're important. But if you look at this from a design perspective, they completely miss the most decisive factor of all.
And that brings us to the real heart of the matter. A nation's fate in this AGI era, it's not really going to be determined by the tech it owns. It's going to be determined by a series of core design choices about how its people actually live. All these choices together create a kind of national default setting.
So let's break this down. First up is this fundamental split, and it happens at the deepest level you can imagine. We're talking core infrastructure. It really helps to think of AGI not as just some single product, but more like a layered system, kind of like a tech company's software stack. It starts at the very bottom with energy, then you build up to compute, then the data, and right at the top, the models themselves. So the first huge question for any nation is, who controls this entire stack? And this is where that choice really comes into focus. On one side, you've got the full stack nation. This is a country that's literally building its own infrastructure from the ground up. It controls its own architecture. It's like building your own operating system. So it can tune the AGI to its own language, its own culture. But on the other side, you've got the API-dependent nation. They're just plugging into services built somewhere else, which means they're inheriting foreign biases and, bit by bit, losing control over their own data. This visual just says it all, doesn't it? Owning that powerful AI engine is just not enough. Sure, having the infrastructure is necessary to even be in the game, but it is not sufficient. If you don't have a clear philosophy, a steering wheel to guide where it's all going, you're just driving a faster car right off a cliff.
Okay, so you've got the infrastructure, but what's next? Well, that brings us to our second big choice. Because having the tech is one thing, but what really, really matters is who gets to write the rules of the game. If you've ever worked in product design, you know the absolute worst thing you can do is just launch something and then frantically try to patch it after it's already out there causing problems. Well, the exact same idea applies to how you run a country. The choice is, do you design the rules beforehand, or do you try to patch the chaos after the fact? And this is the core difference. Are you proactively designing your society's future, or are you just forced to accept the terms of service that were written by some global tech giant in another country? The nations that pre-design their rules for things like AI-generated content, they can manage AGI's arrival. But the ones that wait, they become rule takers, just constantly reacting to the chaos. And ultimately, this is what happens. When a nation can't design its own rules, that huge gap between its old, obsolete laws and the insane pace of new technology gets filled with just one thing: social conflict, and it just keeps escalating. This brings us to the deepest and maybe the most profound divide of them all, the story a nation tells itself about what it all means. You could call it the user experience of life. For decades, the dominant story across most of the world was pretty simple, right? It was about growth and efficiency, higher productivity, lower costs. But AGI just shatters that entire narrative. Once a machine is more productive than a human at pretty much any task, what's the promise a nation makes to its own people? What's the point? You could almost think of it as a nation branding problem. A tech narrative nation basically frames life as this endless, totally exhausting competition against AGI. A human narrative nation, on the other hand, it changes the question completely. It asks, hey, what actually makes a good life? Where do we find our dignity? And it positions AGI not as our competitor, but as a co-pilot to help us get there. Okay, so when you take these three choices, infrastructure, rules, and narrative, and you put them all together, something incredible happens.
A stunning pattern emerges. It's like a fractal, repeating itself from the smallest possible scale all the way to the largest. Because look, these huge national-level decisions, they don't just come from nowhere, right? They're the sum of all those microscopic choices we talked about back in part 1. Do we consciously design our own lives, or do we just react to whatever the latest app throws at us? And then that scales up through the very structures of our work, which we delve into in part 2. Are we designing the systems we work in, or are we just becoming another cog inside them?
And it keeps going, scaling through what we decide is important enough to teach the next generation. That was part 3. Are we actually teaching them how to think, or just how to get the right answer?
Until finally, all those tiny, almost invisible design defaults, they lock into place, they crystallize, and they harden into the fate of an entire civilization. The micro truly becomes the macro. And this just completely reframes the whole AGI race, doesn't it? It's not about who has the fastest chips or the biggest models anymore. It's a competition between different models for living. Which society is actually more livable? Which system preserves human dignity?
And so, this is the decisive crossroads where we all stand right now. Do we build these nations of speed, just racing to adopt AGI, even if it means grinding people down in the process? Or do we choose to build a civilization of balance, where technology actually serves human dignity and allows us to ride this incredible wave instead of being crushed by it? So, at the end of the day, what's the ultimate takeaway? It's this. The polarization we're seeing everywhere isn't really caused by the technology. It's caused by the choices we make about what kind of humans we want to design for. This isn't just a problem for some engineers in a lab to solve. It is a profoundly human design problem, and it belongs to every single one of us.